Hey, my name is Shanshan. I sell art on shanshan.co. Today we're going to review Ant-Man and the Wasp in Quantumania. So this is a film by Payton. The time is 2 hours, 5 minutes, which is pretty tight considering it's a Marvel film. They could have done 2.5 hours easily. So I think they kind of kept it tight as possible, around 2 hour mark, which I think is good. Usually I like an hour and a half, but you know, for a really complicated plot like this, one of these big tentpole properties, I think maybe 2 hours may be more appropriate than an hour and a half. Actors are Paul Rudd plays Ant-Man again. Evangeline Lilly plays the Wasp, the mom. Michael Douglas plays Dr. Hank Pym. Michelle Pfeiffer plays the grandma, Janet Van Dyne. Jonathan Majors plays Kang the Conqueror. Kathryn Newton plays Cassie Lang, the daughter. So Ant-Man's daughter is kind of playing around with this satellite to communicate with the quantum world, and she unknowingly sets off a beaker that causes them to get sucked into the quantum world. When they're sucked in, they're placed into different parts of the world, so they're spending a part of the story kind of looking for each other. The mother and the daughter, the mother and the father are looking for the daughter, and the grandparents are also looking for the other one. So they're all kind of going their separate ways, looking for making different allies, finding out what's going on. The grandma's very secretive about what happened inside of the quantum world, and then she slowly kind of unravels her story that she lived because she was there 30 years, so she has a lot of allies. So that kind of helps them take on this arch villain who's Kang, who has conquered the quantum world and is looking to escape and conquer more worlds outside the quantum world in the multiverse, slowly wipe out other timelines. So very dangerous character. So from the CGI point, it's obviously fantastic, great CGI. I think this is pretty standard nowadays from 2010s going on. I don't think they could have made this film in 2010s easily, so I don't think they're really innovating. I think the new Avatar movie had some really cool special effects. This one has special effects that are really cool. There's a lot of artists that worked on it, but I think from the 2010s on, you're going to have kind of this really, hardcore CGI that you can really put to effect. So it's very impressive, but at the other hand, it's just kind of like been there, done that kind of thing. There's a little bit of too many superheroes. It's the mom, the dad, the grandma, the grandpa, the daughter. It's a series of 5 people, which is kind of fun. It kind of makes it more of a family film. But on the other hand, it's really nice. Like if you think about the 1990s, there'd be like Batman versus one villain. I think that story is much more fully fleshed out. You get Batman's past and who he's dating and all that kind of thing, and why the villain is the way the villain is, why they want to seek havoc and take over a city of Gotham, for example. And this is just this huge, massive universe in the not in the multiverse, but only in the quantum world, but it's just infinite. There's 5 superheroes. There's kind of 2 villains in this, a villain and his sidekick, which is kind of coming back again. So a lot of different overlapping, like sometimes just one classic villain and one classic hero is a stronger story than multi characters. There's many overlays from multiple sci-fi properties, I would say. They have these dome guys that have kind of a glass face, looks like from The Black Hole. I think that was a 1979, really great film. Probably most kids are not going to know what that is, so for them it's just a brand new kind of look. There's also people that look like Jawas from Star Wars 4, so that's kind of a reboot as well. There were some characters that looked at Lord of the Ring, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it looked like Lord of the Ring when I was in there a little bit. Also a little bit kind of Avatar-ish with kind of the special world and kind of an ethnic rebel leader. But very enjoyable. It's a successful, formula that pull bits and pieces together. That was one of why Quentin Tarantino is so successful as a director, is he's always kind of copied bits and pieces of classic films and stitched them together. So it really depends. When you borrow from other films, you have to really stitch them together so it feels like one world versus kind of stealing from all the different worlds. Like Matrix 4 was horrible because they borrowed excessively from Matrix 1 and it just felt like just super lazy. But I think here they didn't borrow too much, just enough to kind of give a really nice flavor. And for sci-fi, you have to start somewhere, so it kind of makes sense to borrow some effects from other worlds. One of the shortfalls, I think, was the Kang backstory. You don't know why he's seeking vengeance and he has this really massive ego and wants to conquer the whole world. I think, the way I would have shot the film was just snip off the whole intro where it's like Paul Rudd just walking around thinking everything's cool in San Francisco, and then they get swamped in. I think you could have narrowed that down to maybe a couple minutes shaved off there, and it really explored kind of Kang's backstory, why he's seeking vengeance, why he wants to conquer the whole multiverse. That would have been a little bit more exciting because you don't really know why he's doing it. You just know he's a villain. You're like, all right, it's the bad guy, but we don't know why he's the bad guy. So I think that would have been a little cooler to kind of flesh that out a little bit more. They did have kind of an intro with him and the grandma, but they don't really explain his backstory, which they could have included there. Bits and pieces, I think, would have made a lot more meat on the bone, so to say, for the villain. I think maybe they'll cover it maybe in a sequel, who knows. It felt a little bit lazy from reusing villains from other films. I think one of the arch nemesis, and maybe in Ant-Man 2 or Ant-Man 1, I don't remember which one, this fellow scientist that betrays the grandpa, he ends up being a villain again in here, but he's kind of a sidekick, and in this really deformed body, which is really kind of gross and really comical. It's almost like, feels like Spaceballs a little bit, which is like, I don't know if you want to make it Spaceballs. It should be somewhat serious. It's okay to make jokes, but you got to have like your villains look like villains that make sense versus this kind of like this giant head with a tiny body. It just like doesn't make any sense in the world, but it's the quantum world. Maybe it's possible in the quantum world. Maybe it makes sense in the comics, but it kind of looks really super goofy in a film. But it is, you know, most of the audience is probably young kids, the teens probably is the primary audience, so they'll probably give it a pass. But I thought it was just kind of goofy. Could have, you know, just done him as a normal character, maybe with some repairs on his body like Darth Vader, but not super goofy like this. It was just so goofy. Kind of like Jaja whatever in Star Wars 1 to 3, and they pulled him out. This is the same feeling as like, you got to pull this character out. It's terrible, you know, but he's only in this film. Obviously at the end of the film they have trailers to the next Ant-Man, so you get kind of a feel of what's going on there. So I think this is a really smart marketing ploy by Marvel, which they've used since the very first Marvel releases. They kind of do sequences to the next film and kind of, you know, oh, what's going to be the sequel to this film if there is one. And so I think that's really smart. You see that a lot with books nowadays. The really popular novels, they'll stick a chapter from their next book in the novel, so you get a really taste of it, and then you want to get that book as well. So it's a really smart marketing ploy, and it gets around having to show all the credits at the beginning of the film. You can just put all the credits at the end of the film. People are still going to watch them because they want to see those little sequential bits. So I think it's a really smart marketing ploy. I think Star Wars came up with it first. I think Star Wars came up with it first, but or maybe it was Matrix. I think it was Matrix. They put all the credits at the film, but I really like that idea of putting all the credits at the end of the film because no one really cares that aren't in the industry, I don't think. It's obviously important for the actors, the producers, anyone related to Hollywood wants to be their name on a screen and have a screen across, and all their friends are like, oh, there you are, you know, but if you're not in the industry, no one really cares about those end credits. You're obviously impressed by the massive team that goes into putting one of these films together. It's just super incredible. But outside of that, I don't think people outside of the industry are going to care. They have kind of a guy that looks like Stan Lee as the Baskin-Robbins character. I think in the original Ant-Man, maybe Stan Lee was that guy. And so they just kind of put in a guy that looks somewhat like Stan Lee, which I guess they're trying to backfill. I don't know if they should have done CGI, make him look like Stan Lee. They could have done that, but they didn't. I don't know. I feel like that. It's kind of like, it would be nice to have Stan Lee around and keep putting him Easter egg in all those films, but you know, he's passed. It is what it is. But yeah, it's pretty fun. I rate it's a pretty fun film. Probably worth collecting if you like Marvel films to kind of rewatch. You can just, you know, buy your collection and just have, you know, Iron Man and the Avengers and all that stuff you can watch over and over again, especially if you have kids. I think that makes sense. If you're an adult, I don't know if it makes sense to have it as a collection, but it is a fun, watchable film that you probably watch again. If you like to subscribe, you can subscribe below, and I'll see you in the next movie review. Thanks for watching, guys.